So today, very exciting day. It's the book birthday. So
Yeah, right.
May
Happy book
4th.
birthday. Glad to
Yeah,
be celebrating it with you and with Malaprops. That's awesome.
thank you.
Yeah, so you guys know Robert already as the number one New York Times bestselling author of the Serafina series, and this is now the second book that I don't know if we call it the Willa series, but the Willa world, let's call it. I want to get into talking about Willa. I'm sure we'll get around to some Serafina questions, especially from our audience. But so for readers who might be more familiar with your Serafina books and maybe haven't met Willa yet, can you tell us more about Willa? Is she human or is she something else? Like, who is Willa?
Sure. So the first thing I want to say, so Willa of Dark Hollow is a independent story. So there's actually two Willa books. Willa of the Wood was first, then Willa of Dark Hollow is published today. But you can start with Willa of Dark Hollow if you wish. You don't have to read the first one, independent story. Willa's stories take place in the same universe as Serafina's stories. So they take place in the same time period and more or less the same region, but instead of specifically Biltmore Estate, they're taking place in the Great Smoky Mountains. And Willa is not human. She is a very special and unusual 13-year-old girl. And she is what is called a Farron. So she has very unusual forest powers. So for example, she can camouflage her skin. So if she's in the bushes, then her skin is going to turn green and look like leaves. If she's standing near a trunk of a tree, her skin's going to be brown like she's bark. So she's not a white person or a black person or a yellow person or a brown person. She's whatever she is next to. So there's even a scene where she looks down into a pool of water at night and sees the black sky reflected and the stars. She sees her face for a moment, but then her skin turns black and has stars on it because, again, she reflects and camouflages into whatever environment she is in. She also speaks an ancient language called Farron, which is so old that all the animals of the forest understand it instinctively. And so her best friends are wolves and bears and otters and foxes and things like that. She also can touch trees and make them grow spontaneously and very rapidly. And so she's got a lot of neat forest powers. Yeah, so that's a little bit about Willa. And it takes place in 1900 to 1901, same time as Serafina. And this is time when big steam-powered industrial logging machines were coming into the Great Smoky Mountains and cutting a lot of trees down. And so this is, of course, Willa's world. Her whole world is the Smoky Mountains and these forests. And so from her point of view, these are very evil men that are cutting down her forest. So this is the story about how this one young person can cope with this overwhelming force and all the changes taking place in her world.
Nice. And did you choose that turn of the century time period because you wanted to match up with the Serafina time period, or was there a different reason you chose that time period for the Great Smoky Mountains and for Willa?
Yeah, so I did want to match up with the Serafina series so that they were in the same time period, but also I wanted to pick a time very early in the industrial logging of that area, because this book, I like to say it's history, mystery, and magic all kind of blended together. So the history is the real part, the location and the settings and the different people involved. So the story is filled with the Farron, but also with the loggers, and the Cherokee people are living there as well. And the European settlers living in their log cabins are there. And so I wanted to depict a time period where this conflict was just starting. Of course, this conflict eventually leads to, many years later, the formation of the national park.
Right. So we're talking about a Great Smoky Mountains that are very different than we experience them now. A place where people lived and hunted and logged. And I mean, this was a working, living place at that time.
That's exactly right. And in fact, Willa, as I said, she's Farron, so she's not human, but she has lost her family and her kin. And so she's adopted by a human family, a man named Nathaniel. And he's lived there on his property where he raises bees and does farming and has an apple orchard and so on, does a lot of the traditional homesteading things. His wife is Cherokee, and he has 3 kids, all of which are half European, half Cherokee. And that's Willa's adopted family. And yeah, so that was a big part of it, was to bring that entire fabric of what was happening at the time period.
Nice. So welcome again. If you're just joining us, I'm Alan Gratz. I'm interviewing Robert Beatty for Malaprop's bookstore as a part of his launch party for his new book, Willa of Dark Hollow. And I wondered if you could tell us, Robert, without spoiling too much, what we can expect out of Willa of Dark Hollow. What's the story without too many spoilers, obviously?
Yes. So I've kind of set the groundwork, right? So we have this magical Farron creature who is closely connected to the forest. Then we have these loggers coming in, destroying it for everybody, not just her and her people, but also the Cherokee and the homesteaders that are living on the farm. If you're familiar with Cades Cove, which is an actual place, that's one of the places that is depicted in the novel. And so Willa is at a point where she cannot fight these people, the loggers, unlike Serafina, who's very fierce and has claws, if you know what I mean. And so she can fight her enemies. Willa is extremely peaceful. She doesn't hurt anything. She doesn't hurt any animals. She doesn't hurt meat. She doesn't eat meat. She certainly would never harm another person, but there is a very dark and sinister force that is doing severe damage to the loggers. And it's a mystery, like, why are these loggers dying? What's happening to them? She's not doing it. But the first mystery is to figure out what is this dark force that's murdering these loggers. And when she finds out what it is, then the question becomes a moral dilemma: does she just let it keep doing that, or does she try to stop it and save the loggers, which of course is the last thing she would ever want to do. Right. She doesn't want to save the loggers. On the other hand, she's also all about protecting life. So she has a moral dilemma on her hands.
It's the same time,
her adopted father, Nathaniel, is a secret and developing activist. So he is becoming an environmental activist, and he's resisting the loggers. The loggers are trying to buy out all the farmers in the area, all the landowners, and he's resisting it and speaking up against them. And because he's speaking against them, they decide to start burning down his barn and sabotaging him, and even frame him for murder. And so that's one of the other conflicts, is Serafina and her Cherokee sister, Hialeah, have to team up and try to figure out who really killed these loggers, because right now the authorities, who are in cahoots with the loggers, have blamed it on their father, and they want to get rid of him. So there's a lot that's going on, and there's a lot of action happening. And so that's a little bit about what the story is about.
Yeah, that's great. Now, you mentioned earlier that this is a companion novel, and you talked about how, readers may know Willa, of course, from Willa of the Wood. But just to be clear, people don't have to have read Willa of the Wood to pick this one up and read it first if they want to?
That's correct. So you can just start with Willa of Dark Hollow. It is a self-contained story. If you want to read Willa of the Wood, that's of course great too. Chronologically, it does take place just prior to it. So, but it's a different story all in itself.
Great. And we've had, there's a couple of questions that are coming in, and I'm going to get to most of the reader questions at the end of the program, but a couple have come in that are about what we're talking about. So a couple of astute readers feel like they have picked up, at least in Willa of the Wood, maybe some references to the Serafina series, maybe a particular character shows up or something like that. Without spoiling too much, are they right?
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, I don't want to spoil too much, so I'll talk in code a little bit here. But in Willa of the Wood, the first book, Serafina makes an appearance, but not in the normal way. So if you've read the first book of Serafina, you wouldn't recognize her. But if you read the second and third books of Serafina, you'll immediately know who it is. And Serafina and Willa, in fact, encounter each other. And Willa also notices somebody else. So she notices, again, I don't want to spoil anything, but she notices somebody else who's a close friend, let's say a four-legged close friend to Serafina. And
Nice.
An astute reader of Serafina will immediately recognize these characters. Now, to Willa, these are new characters.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But to your savvy readers out there, you're on the right track.
Yeah.
So speaking of both the main characters of the Serafina series and the Willa series, what were your inspirations for these two main characters? Are they inspired by particular people?
Yes, definitely. So let me back up a little. So I've been writing for many, many years. And there came a point where my daughters, I have three daughters, my older daughter said, why don't you write a book for me? Write a book that I can read. And so eventually I said, yeah, that's a pretty cool idea. I'm going to try that. Of course, that terrified me because I thought it'd be really depressing if my own daughters didn't like my book. So I got them to help me write it. So the Serafina books and the Willa books are a joint family effort with me and my daughters and my wife. We all work together on it. We come up with the ideas together. I write the actual sentences, but then I read the chapters to my family. And you guys would get a kick out of it because my daughters are brutal critics, and they'll just say, "Oh, Dad, that part was so boring. Just cut that," or they'll say, "That was too scary. We don't want that. It's too scary." And so they help me fine tune and refine the story. And sometimes people have said, "Well, why? How is it that a man, me, is writing about these young girls?" And the reason is because I'm writing for my daughters, with my daughters and my wife, and so I have a built-in focus group to keep me on the right track. But I really wanted to write stories about brave and unusual girls who were kind of strange in their own way. Both Willa and Serafina are very unusual, but they have a heroic heart and they want to do good. And I just wanted to give that kind of story to my daughters so that they could see these types of girls in action and making decisions and dealing with challenges and staying bold. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, so that's the overall inspiration, but specifically Serafina was inspired by my daughter Genevieve, who used to like to sneak around the house unseen and unheard. She'd hide in a closet. She would try to prowl into my office. Like, for example, I'd be at my desk writing. I'd get up, go to the kitchen, get something to eat. And while I was away, she'd sneak under my desk and she'd be hiding under my desk. And then while I was writing, she would I'd be at my computer writing and she would tie my shoelaces together. So she was a very sneaky little girl like that.
A little gremlin, yeah.
Yeah, so you can recognize that sort of person who prowls around unseen and unheard. That was the inspiration.
Nice. So that was a question I had, but also Ava Wilson wrote that one in. So thank you, Ava, for being here and for that question. Ava. Yeah. So I had a question for you about since the Willa books are a year apart, and we're introduced to Willa and Willa of the Wood, And now it's a year later. And I wanted to ask you sort of, because I love this question as an author, like, how has your character grown and changed? How is Willa different from the first book? Is she different from the first book to the second book?
Yes. In the first book, she's 12 years old. She has lived with her Farron clan. That's what their tribe is called, a clan. And she has been taught from birth by what's called the Padaran. That's the leader of their clan, very charismatic, bigger than life, almost godlike leader. And he has taught her that humans are evil. They're destroying their forest and they kill animals, and all of them are totally 100% evil. So something happens to Willa in book 1 where she begins to doubt this in a very serious way. And she, in fact, begins to learn much more about humans, and that some of them are very good people. They're not all evil. And she begins to learn that maybe it's her clan and her leader who is perhaps the issue. And so that is very much a story about a girl who is born and raised in a society that has evil traits, and she has to resist those traits and become an individual in her own right. And so at the beginning, she hates humans and is very prejudiced against them. But over time, she learns much more about humans. Now in book 2, it's a year later, she is much more comfortable with the complexities of the world. She's learned much more. She still hasn't left the mountains. She only lives in the Great Smoky Mountains, but she is very much more aware that there's different kinds of people, and that there are good humans and bad humans, and good Farron and bad Farron, and so on. And she's 13 now. And so at this point, she's trying to decide, okay, I was raised by my grandmother in the old ways of the Farron. She's what's called a wood witch, which means she has these powers that I described. And so she's following the ways of her grandmother, who taught her all of this lore of the forest, how to speak to a mountain lion, or how to become friends with a pack of wolves, and how to get a tree to grow, and so on. So she learned all this from her grandmother. So in book 2, she's wondering, okay, I learned a lot from my grandmother. When do I start to become myself? It seems like the decisions I'm making are the decisions my grandmother would make. When do I make my own decisions? Does that happen when I'm 12 or 13 or 14? And so she's a more mature person in Dark Hollow.
Nice.
Yeah.
No, I love it. That's a question I always like to think about with my own characters, and I like to ask other authors about theirs. Yeah. So again, welcome everybody. If you're joining us late, I'm Alan Gratz. I'm interviewing Robert Beatty for Malaprop's bookstore as a part of the launch party for his new book, Willa of Dark Hollow. And Robert, we have a question in from the Peanut Gallery. Okay. And this one is from Gwen Schultz, and I thought it was a nice follow-up to what we've been talking about. She says, hello, Robert. What was your inspiration for using the Great Smoky Mountains? The mountains are magical. And I wanted to blend this with a question I had for you. I know that you and your family are very much outdoors people. You love to explore, and you were even doing this before you lived in this region. Can you tell us a bit about your inspiration, how the outdoors, your love of the outdoors has played into why you wrote these books?
Right. So I do love the outdoors. It started from a very young age. So my family, my father and my brothers in particular were very outdoorsy. My father was a huge hunter, really into hunting. So I was born and raised a hunter and trained as a hunter by the time I was 8 and 10 years old, which is going to surprise a lot of people who have read my books, because it seems like I'm kind of anti-hunting and pro-animal, and that's not quite true. I understand hunting. I just don't like poaching and cruelty and trapping and cruelty to animals and things like that. But we did a lot of fishing and canoeing and outdoor stuff for my whole life, especially when I was young. So now to answer your question about the Great Smoky Mountains, so I just love the Blue Ridge Mountains, and I love the Great Smoky Mountains in particular. I think they feel magical when you're there, and I love being there. And so I love forests in particular, forests all over the world, but we have some of the best forests right here. And so I just really wanted to write a book that sort of celebrated that and absorbed that. I can really only write about what I love because that's just my motivation, my inspiration.
Sure.
It takes a long time and many hours, days, months, years to write a book. So you got to really kind of be passionate about what you're writing about. And I'm extremely passionate about forests and how amazing they are and how important it is to protect them. And I, of course, if you've read Serafina or Willa, you know I love animals of all kinds, birds and predators and so on. So with Willa of Dark Hollow and Willa of the Wood, I took a number of trips to the Smoky Mountains with my older daughter, Camille, and we went there. And if you had encountered us at the time, you would have thought we were quite strange people. We would go down, we went to Elkmont Camp, if you've ever been there. And we went up that trail that follows the Little River. And we would just go down to the Little River and just sit there for a couple hours and just talk about, okay, if you had a creature who was born into this forest, what would she do? What would she be like? Well, that's where we came up with the idea that she would have this green skin that would blend into the colors of the forest, kind of the way a chameleon does, or a screech owl, or any number of different animals. And we thought, well, she would definitely have a very strong connection to trees, and she would know the trees individually, that she wouldn't just think of them as sort of empty objects. She would actually know them personally and think of them as sentient beings and even speak to them. And so the internal religion of Willa's mind came from Camille and I just sitting in the forest and by the Little River, brainstorming what that character was going to be like.
Nice. A question I had for you is, do your books as a whole, this is the Serafina books and the Willa books, do they have specific themes or ideas that you're trying to explore as a whole, or between the series?
Yes. So my first goal, my number one goal, and the most important thing is to write a fun story. I just want people to be able to read the story, and it's no good if it's not a good story that people enjoy reading, then I've failed at my very first task. So
totally agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the number one thing is I just want to tell a good story and keep people reading. And I actually wrote a little blurb about this today that I'm going to post later this week, and that is, when I think about why I like to write and why I like to read, it's because I like to just slip into a different world for a little while. It's not that I don't like the world we live in. It's fine. I love it. But yeah, I just love this feeling when I'm reading a book or writing it, where I just slip into a totally different world and I just am experiencing that world and I'm in that world for a little while. It might just be a few moments or a few hours, or it might be a book I read over the course of days. But I just love that feeling. And so I just really wanted to do that.
Nice. It's a bit of escapism for you, just like your readers, I guess.
Yes, right. So to answer your question about themes, at the same time, I do love ideas. I love themes. I've touched on some of the things in Willa of the Wood, where it was about a girl who had to resist the evilness of her own society and become an individual and stand up for what she felt was right. And over and above what the great leader of her clan thought was right, she had to decide, no, I know better than him. I need to make a stand. And the other thing that I like to really touch on is actually articulated in the Serafina novels in book 2, and that is the expression stay bold. So to stay bold. And what that means is you're going to confront all sorts of difficult problems and challenges and They may not be men in black cloaks like like Serafina and Braden, but they're going to be big problems, right? And so no matter what kind of problems they are or how long it takes, you have to stay bold, meaning stay brave, keep your courage, figure out what you need to do, and then just go after it and just keep going after it.
Very
and
nice.
that really starts, the genesis of that was that when I started writing, I was 11 years old, and I was a really bad writer at that point. And I had to write novel after novel and just practice and practice and practice for many years, even decades. And so that whole time I had to stay bold, right? I had to just, I could not give up. I had to keep working towards my goal. And eventually I achieved it.
That's what I tell a lot of young writers. They say, how do you get published? And I say, I think the people who get published are the people who didn't stop writing.
Yeah.
I think that's really the trick of it.
Yeah.
That's great. So just a reminder, I'm Alan Gratz. I'm talking with Robert Beatty. We are with Malaprop's bookstore as a part of the launch party for his brand new book, Willa of Dark Hollow, which just came out today. So today is its book birthday. So we have a couple of questions. A few people have been asking similar questions over here in the chat, and I want to get to these. So I'm going to try and give some shout outs to who are asking these questions. Betsy Garland and let's see, we'll get to that one from Autumn.
Hi, Betsy.
But yeah, Betsy and Yvonne Sullivan are asking about TV and movie stuff. So this is a fun question, and one I definitely wanted to get to. So what's up with TV and movie stuff for Willa?
I'm sure no one's interested in that subject.
No, nobody cares.
No one cares about that. So I have a huge announcement for Willa of Dark Hollow and Willa of the Wood, and that is that we are actively developing a multi-season live action TV series. So we're very happy about that. I'm involved with that project. I'm one of the executive producers. It's being financed by a very large studio who is totally dedicated to the project and totally gets the project, if you know what I mean. They understand Willa and they understand the story and all the themes of the story. And so they're very gung-ho about it. I'm working with an excellent production company that is founded and operated by Amy Adams. So you recognize that name. She's a very famous actress, yes. And it's interesting, cool story. So she was actually reading the Willa books to her 11-year-old daughter at night. So each night, when that was their bedtime story. Nice. And so Amy Adams read Willa of the Wood and now Willa of Dark Hollow to her daughter at night. And her mom said, "You should make this movie, Mom." And so Amy went to her colleagues who were at E1, who owned the dramatic rights, and they got together. And so now Amy's going to be one of the executive producers, really the main executive producer on the project. And we're developing the script and doing the concept art and bringing the writers and the producers together. And it takes time, but we're definitely in the process of it. Now, it could go to, well, as you know, the books, all my books are published by Disney Hyperion. So shout out to Disney Hyperion. Thank you very much. They're wonderful to work with. I would love to see the Willa series go to Disney Plus. I think that would be a natural home for it. And that could happen because Disney Plus has its own studio, obviously, and makes their own amazing work, but they also sometimes acquire it from other production companies. So that could also happen here. So hopefully that would happen, or it could be in multiple places. So it could be on Netflix and Apple and different places. But
that would be awesome. I hope that works out. And so you mentioned writers. Are you working on a script, or is it handed off to other script writers?
Right. So I'm one of the executive producers who is sort of watching over the script writers. There's a team of 3 script writers. They're excellent. And they're writing the script outlines and the scripts themselves. They hand them up to the executive producers. We provide notes that
Nice.
that they then respond to. And, I write novels for a living, so I don't write like one sentence. I have like 20 pages of notes. So I'm very heavily involved in it. So
I'm sure
it's
they
a lot
love
of
that.
fun. Yeah. And then on the Serafina side, we're not as far in the process. We were at one point farther along, but then COVID and various other things disrupted it. And so I can't make any announcements today about the specifics. We don't have the team yet assembled, but that's what we're working on. We're trying to get the team together and get all the pieces together to work on a Serafina project as well. I would love to do that, believe me. If you've seen my Serafina book trailers, you know that I'm really into video and into that art form. So I'd love to see Serafina as well.
Cool. Well, you anticipated Donna Cincy's question. So Donna, thank you for asking about the possibility of Serafina on the big or small screen.
Thank you, Donna.
You've segued into rather nicely. I want to find it here. Autumn Stapleton asks, the book preview movies for Serafina are really enjoyable. Any plans for Willa videos? Also, is it correct that your daughter plays Serafina in the videos?
Yes. So thank you for the question. That's a very nice question. I appreciate it. I really enjoyed making those videos. So just so you know, those videos were made here locally in Asheville. So you can have, if you're connected with Asheville, have some Asheville pride about that. We conceived them and produced them here. We filmed them here. They were filmed at Biltmore Estate and at DuPont Park. They were also filmed in my backyard. So, they were all different sites around Asheville, and they were very fun to make. At the time, I was trying to be a responsible, objective producer. And I said, okay, we need to find a good person to play Serafina. And my daughter, Genevieve, said, well, Dad, obviously I'm Serafina. And so she wiggled her way into that role. And we did some screenshots or screen tests. And we decided, yeah, okay, she makes a pretty good Serafina, it turns out. So she's not only the inspiration, she's also the actor in all of the trailers. She was 12 when we did the first one, then 13, then 14. And I told her, you must stop growing. The character's not growing as fast as you are. I told her, I'm laying down the line, stop growing. But she just ignored me and she kept growing. And it's funny because some people who see the third trailer for Serafina and Splintered Heart who don't know me or that's my daughter, they're like, that girl looks like she's 15 or something. That doesn't look like Serafina. Serafina's only 12. And it's like, yeah, it's because she is 15 when we shot that. But
nice.
So she kind of aged out of the trailers.
Yeah, but you can't lose the dad points by firing her from the gig. You can't.
Right, exactly. So then what started happening is, I did the first trailer before the first book even came out. And so at that point, I had lots of time. And then and the trailer helped the book do well. Yeah. And so we said, okay, let's do another one. But then I had to write the second Serafina book very rapidly so that it could come out the next year. And but fitting in a book trailer production and writing a book became increasingly difficult.
I don't doubt
And
it.
so when we got to the Willa books, I would have loved to make those book trailers. I had tons of ideas. We talked about how we would do it. But in the end, I decided I needed to write the books rather than make the trailers. I was very much in danger of enjoying making the videos more than writing the books. And that's a bit of a problem. Yeah. So I decided to pull it back. Also, my hope is that the TV series will be my expression of how Willa's world looks and how she looks and so on.
Nice, of course, yeah. So I know that first book, you've got all the time in the world. I think I wrote my research notes out by hand for my first book because I had no deadline. I hadn't sold the book. And then the next time they were like, now write a book and you've got a year. And I was like, I can't write things down. I have to type. I can't be slow. I can't imagine producing a trailer like you did at the same time.
So
Speaking, go
let's
ahead.
stop a moment. Tell us a little bit about your book. Is it Ground Zero that you've been out with, or?
Yeah, so Ground Zero came out in February, and it
Mhm.
is it's a story of 9/11. This year is the 20-year anniversary of 9/11. This September will be, and I had a lot of kids asking me for a book about September 11th, and so finally tackled it. It's the story of two different kids. Brandon, who's 9 years old and is caught in the North Tower on September 11th, 2001, and has to try and
Wow.
survive. And the
Mhm.
second story is her name is Reshmina, the main character, and she is 11 years old, and she is an Afghan girl who is going through her own version of 9/11 in the present day as her village becomes a battleground between the United States and the Taliban. And I
Right.
go back and forth between the chapters. So very different than the world that you're depicting, but at the same time, I think we both are writing books that have like a social angle to them, like you were talking about themes of standing up and being bold and standing up for what you believe in, and I think we're both writing it in the same direction with those themes.
Right. Yeah. So that's Ground Zero, and that's an awesome book. Also, Refugee is a really awesome book too. I loved Refugee.
Thank you.
And I envy your ability to somehow write and then publish books right at the moment that they're most needed.
I've gotten lucky a couple of times with my timing. I was joking with my wife. I even made one of the characters in Ground Zero into skateboarding because it was 2001 and skateboarding was big back then. And I thought, well, I'll just put something in from 2001. And now I go walk down at the River Park here in Asheville and like everybody's skateboarding again. And I'm like, I called it.
Yeah. You didn't call it. You made it happen. It's your book. That's why they're doing it. Yeah.
That's right. Now, I part of it is that I'm trying to find historical topics that do have something to say about the present. And so anytime anytime I'm talking about the past, but trying to relate it to the present, unfortunately, some of the things like refugees and like the war in Afghanistan have been going on for so long. These crises and these wars that anytime I put a book out about it, it seems like it would be kind of the right time. So I'm writing a book about climate change right now. So expect climate change to be in the news more and more. So, but let's get back to you and your stuff. So we had a question here. Ava asked, I think we've had a question from Ava before, but it was too fun to go back into this. How are you going to cast Willa? And will there be open casting? I think Ava has some designs here.
Okay. Hi, Ava. So we are in the process of casting and looking at actresses, and I was watching a show just the other day and I saw somebody and I was like, okay, that she might be a good Willa right there. And so I sent an email to the other producers and they practically laughed at me. They're like, yeah, we already know that, Robert. We're already talking to her. So, but it is open casting, and at this point, it's still been kind of quiet. There's not a formal call at this point, but I'll keep you posted on that when it goes public. And we are exploring different ideas. We're going to obviously use a human girl to depict Willa. The person we're working with on special effects production and so on actually comes from Lucasfilms and Star Wars.
Ooh, nice.
And so he assures me he can camouflage her skin and do all the different special effects that are needed for that. So
they can do wonders with the CGI stuff today.
Yeah. So it should be very fun. But just go to the website, Robert Beatty Books, and just put in a message and get in contact with us, and we'll take a look.
Awesome. And do you think that they would film any of it locally in the Smokies or in the Blue Ridge Mountains?
Yeah, we've been talking about that, certainly establishing shots for sure. But also the bulk of it may be shot here. We're not sure. The main thing we need is just amazing forests and waterfalls and rocks and things like that. So, so hopefully this location will be strongly considered. I'm certainly going to be moving in that direction and trying to get that to happen. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know if there'd be like background shots where you need like loggers and settlers and stuff like the way they did in Hunger Games, which I think they filmed locally for when Katniss is getting up and out of her district. That would be cool. I know I have a writer friend who actually is an extra in that movie because she loved those books so much. She went down there.
Oh, cool.
So we've got a few other, I'm going to hit some more of these questions here from our audience. So if it looks like I'm looking away, I'm just reading our chat here real quick.
Okay.
So Kristen Walmsley asked, I thought this was a really interesting question. We've talked about how maybe there's some cameos in this from Serafina, but this is a question she asks, Kristen asks, will there be a crossover? I kind of want one because Serafina and Willa have similar personalities. Would you ever do a book where they actually meet and talk and have an adventure together?
Right. So if you were here earlier, you heard me talk about how Serafina and another character from book 2 of the Serafina series have a bit of a cameo. They have an interaction. Willa and Serafina have a very important bonding interaction. So that the two do overlap a little bit. It was my original intention to make them totally overlap. But then this is some of the strange things that happen in the world. When one studio bought Willa, but then a different one bought Serafina, then it brings up an issue of the TV series and how those two would interconnect with each other. So right now, I'm keeping them separate for that reason. It's kind of a strange reason, but
no, it's I
want them to become TV series, and they have a better chance of becoming TV series separate. Right. But then depending on how things go, if I get a chance, I'm going to bring them together.
Right. Well, it's like Spider-Man with Sony and and the X-Men with Sony and the Avengers and company with Marvel and Disney. So now they're realizing the potential of the crossover. So maybe if you get them both done separately, then somebody will say, oh, wait, we can make this awesome combo project. That would be amazing. Very cool. Christina Berkeley asks, what are you going to write next? Do we have more Willa books coming or something new? What's on the horizon?
Okay. So I have started a new book. My daughter, Elizabeth, and I have been brainstorming and figuring it out. Elizabeth was very young when we started on Serafina, but she saw her sisters, help with the trailers and help create the books. And so she's been raring to go. She's like, Dad, okay, what's going to be our book? And so Elizabeth and my wife, Jennifer, and I, we've all been brainstorming the new book. So it's not going to be a Willa book or a Serafina book. It's going to be a whole new character.
All right.
I don't want to tell you too much about it to get ahead of myself here, but it takes place in the mountains of Western North Carolina, like my other stories. It is actually what's called a contemporary fantasy. So it's taking place in current times. All I can say is mostly, if you know what I mean. So there's a bit of things that happen that connect back to the older world that I normally write in. Nice. And again, I'm speaking in code here, but I think you get the idea. So some things are happening, they're interconnecting, but it's going to be similar to my other stories in that it's about the Blue Ridge Mountains and a female character and a lot of mystery and magic and mixed with the history.
It sounds great. You can call all this maybe the Beatty verse. So that you've got
yes.
Right there, so now you've got all these, now you'll have a present day story and we can see the effects of the past. You've got to make sure it all crosses over.
That's right, yes.
So they can all have the big crossover moment. That would be amazing. That's awesome. So I'm looking here, let's see. Peggy Hypes asks, will there be a collaboration with Biltmore for a Serafina tour or the Smoky Mountain National Park for a Willa tour?
Okay, yeah, very good question. So I'm close friends with the people who run Biltmore Estate and own Biltmore Estate. They're very good allies to the series, and they've been very gracious in their treatment of the book series. They let me film the videos in the house, which is totally unprecedented. They'd never
That's
done
amazing.
that before. And so that was awesome. And so they're good friends and good allies to the story. Now, having said that, we do have tours that we do with classrooms of kids. So there is an organization called Orange Sky, and they take large sets of classrooms, and the teachers will teach the Serafina novels in the classroom. They'll use the teacher's guides, which are the Serafina teacher's guides, and the Willa teacher's guides are on my website, Robert Beatty Books. So any teachers that are listening can go and get those. They're PDF files and they're free, and they're very extensive, and you just pick what you want out of there. So they teach the novels. The novels are being taught in over 1,000 classrooms nationwide. And then they bring after the kids read and study the novels, they go on a field trip to Biltmore Estate, and then they come and see me at a theater in downtown Asheville. And
Nice.
we have Q&A and so on. So we have a very formal method of educational tours for kids. Now, having said that, there isn't a audio tour or a other kind of tour that adults would do at Biltmore Estate. But the closest thing to do would be to get what's one of the private tours that you can pay for at Biltmore Estate, where they'll say, okay, we can take you anywhere you wish. So those guides have all read Serafina, and they're very good at showing you exactly where Serafina has snuck around, and where the secret doors are, and where certain video, where shots were taken, and so on. So
Very cool.
a lot of times, if you ask the people, what are called the docents, those are the helpers and the interpreters at Biltmore Estate, most of them have read Serafina and know it very well. Once in a while, you'll get somebody who hasn't, and they're often quite like, no, I haven't read that, and they don't really want to talk about it. But in general, the docents are very nice and will answer any questions about Serafina when you're there.
Very cool. Awesome. Did you have something else to throw in there?
No, that's it.
No, that's okay. I just didn't want to cut you off. No, that's great. So if you're looking for like the inside experience at Biltmore, especially for Serafina, it sounds like go and take a private tour and ask for somebody who's read the books. That's awesome. Jeannie Estridge had a question early on that was more about writing. And so it seems like it's a great time to bring this in.
Okay.
When did you know that you wanted to be a writer?
Okay, great question. So I wasn't a really strong reader. I struggled to learn how to read when I was, 4 and 5 years old. I struggled a bit, but once I got the hang of it, I totally loved it. And I loved stories of all kinds. So I loved reading books. I loved movies. And I loved listening to my father tell stories around the campfire at night when we were out in the woods. And I just loved stories. And one day I ran out of books to read in my house. I used to read The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings and The Once and Future King and Sword and Stone and medieval fantasies like that, and the Narnia Chronicles and things. And one day I ran out of books to read. And this was sort of a mom catastrophe because there was no Kindle, there was no Amazon. You couldn't get a book quickly. And so she said, my mom said, well, there's a typewriter in the closet. Why don't you play with that? Those were her exact words. Typewriter in the closet. Why don't you play with that? And so I pulled out this IBM Selectric typewriter and I put a white piece of paper in it. And I just typed out chapter 1 and I just started writing, and I wrote my first novel when I was 11.
Wow, nice.
So I'd love to say it was the most awesome novel ever written, but I think it might have been perhaps the worst novel ever written. It just was no good. And the only person I could get to read it was my mom. And so she gave me some advice on it, and I heard what she said. I'm like, okay, that makes sense. I can do better. And so I wrote another one. And then I got my mom to read it and my brothers and my friends, listened to what they had to say. Nobody can tell you how to write, but they can tell you their experience while reading what you've written.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And all I could tell was boy, I was not getting through. They were not picking up on the story I was trying to tell. And
Yeah.
so I wrote another novel, and I just kept writing and writing for my whole life. And I did other things. I became a mechanical engineer. When I was 11, I also started software programming, and that was my other great passion. I love software and computers and technology. And so my whole life, I've been programming and doing software and engineering, but at the same time, I've been writing novels. So but I realized I do have to eat. So I decided to go into engineering instead of the writing.
Yeah.
And so I became an engineer, and I became eventually the founder and CEO of an internet software company. And I did that for many years. I just totally loved being a CEO. But I'd get home after, working for 14 hours. I'd get home at midnight, and guess what I would do? I would write my novel. I would work on my novels. And because I was CEO, I was like, okay, cool. I've got some power here. Here, you read my novel and you read my novel. And I spread it around my whole company, and they'd bring feedback to me.
Nice.
And I would learn from that. And I would get great feedback from everybody that worked at my company with me. And so over the years, I just, you can't do something over and over again and not improve a little bit each time. So it took me a long time, but I eventually started getting better and better at writing.
Nice. That's what I tell young writers, is that if they want to get better, the number one way to do that is to keep writing. You don't get better at basketball by sitting on the couch and thinking about basketball. You don't get better at playing an instrument by sitting around thinking about it. You've actually got to do the thing. You have to practice it, and writing is no different. You get better every time you do it. And
what I tell people is that writing is a job, and it's no different than being an engineer or a construction worker or a car salesman or whatever. It's a job, and it's a set of skills, and those skills are learnable. You can learn those skills. So I think a lot of people feel like, hey, writing is just this magical thing, and you're born with this talent, and you either have it or you don't. And it's okay. I can assure you, I did not. I did not have any talent. I did not have any writing skills. I could barely write a sentence. But just by sheer force of will and practicing for many years, and by the way, the only reason I practiced was because I loved doing it. I couldn't stop. I wanted to tell stories. And so I eventually developed, a modicum of skill where I could write a story that somebody wanted to read other than my mom. And so that's when I started becoming successful. Nice. And so if you're a writer, you're not born with it. You have to work at it. Yeah. The only thing you really need to be a writer is the desire to tell stories. If you don't have that, if you don't have the desire to do it, then just give up now.
Right. Well, we're about out of time. I want to do one last question. I want to bring it back to Willa.
Okay.
And Donna Cincy asks, if Willa had a favorite part of the Great Smoky Mountains, where would it be?
Yes. So Willa's favorite part of the Smoky Mountains, now keep in mind, Willa lives on what she calls the Great Mountain. That's how she refers to it. To her, the Great Mountain is almost a sentient being. She looks up at it and says, like if something amazing happens, she looks up at it and says, did you do this? She speaks to it. And so the Great Mountain is very important to her. And she feels that almost everything comes from the Great Mountain. And to you and me, the Great Mountain is Clingman's Dome. Okay. Nice. She does not use those words because that's the human name for it. So she has no use for that. But to you and me, it's Clingman's Dome. And in particular, the spot that inspired the Willa story more than anything is the little river on that flows down from Klingman's Dome. So if you want to go there, you go to Elkmont Camp, and there's a trail, which ironically is an old logging road, but you follow that trail up the Little River, and you'll see all sorts of beautiful trees and little miniature waterfalls that don't have names, and it's just a lovely place. And that's one of the great inspirations for the story. And then the other place that's really cool, that is really amazing because of the sheer size of the trees, is the Joyce Kilmer Memorial Forest. It's one of the closest things we have to an old growth forest in this area. The trees are massively large, like 10 feet across. And
Nice.
Those are what the trees looked like when Willa was there. Okay.
Nice.
They're big tulip poplar trees, and it's really a cool place. So if you want to go on a nice day hike, go to those two locations.
That's awesome. And so just a reminder, today is the book birthday of Willa of Dark Hollow. So Robert, it's been a super pleasure to be with you on this first day of your book launch. I'm really flattered that we got to talk and that I get to ask you about it. You got some signed copies at Malaprops, I'm guessing?
Yes. So thanks for asking about that. So there are signed copies at Malaprops. If you just want to go by the store, you can get them, or with an appointment. But more importantly, you can order the books online. There should be a link in the description of one of these. And if you follow that link, you can get a personalized book that I will sign to you or to one of your loved ones. One of the things that brings me the most joy is when I see a mother and a daughter reading the book together, or a grandmother, a mother and a daughter reading the book together. So there's a lot of grandmothers that are big Willa fans and read the book with their daughters. And I find that really cool. So if you want a personalized book, go to Malaprops and to the link for Malaprops, and you write what you want it to be personalized to, or who and what the message you want. And you put that in the order note, and they'll bring it to me, and I'll sign that book, and you'll get a personalized copy.
It's magic. And I'm told that the info is in the chat. So please look for the info there. And Katie's back with us. Katie, did we get all that right?
You guys could have a job at my store if you wanted.